welcome to another edition of She Leads. I'm Sarah Wu here with Anima Viva. For those of you who've been watching and, a few times a week, we've been putting these out. They're on YouTube. It's a really fun way for us just to talk to the people that inspire us and learn a little bit about what's happening, in people's worlds. It's so easy just to kind of get lost in our own world and in all the negative news that's happening. And so I really love She Leads because it's really for me, like helping just to feel connected and to know that people are doing good work. It's really, really easy to spiral out and just feel super yucky. And the woman that's here today with us, I just absolutely adore and love. She's a mentor to me and a really good friend and sister, and also on the Anima Viva Council, which is this council of women that we've created. We haven't done a whole lot with it yet, but hopefully it will get some momentum as the year keeps progressing, but really helping us here at Anima Viva just to stay relevant and mindful and respectful and know that we're on the right path. So I'm welcoming Jess Robertson. And Jess Robertson is I'm going to read it, is a social entrepreneur, a breathwork specialist, and a community builder, best known as the co-founder of Modo Yoga. She's the co-founder or a founder CEO of Modo, and she scaled it from 6 studios in Canada to 75 studios worldwide. And the growth is fueled by positive and enduring change. She's a passionate leader about the intersection between breathwork, leadership, and innovation. And she has an undergrad in medical anthropology from McGill. And specifically, she also comes with a history of her own chronic pain, which really helped to cement her lifelong interest in examining health and wellness cross-culturally, historically, and in the cutting edge of science. And then her graduate studies are in Buddhist studies, which ignited a lifelong dedication to weaving mindfulness into every aspect of life, from doing the dishes to parenting to business and health. She's a passionate speaker, a lighthearted teacher, facilitator, and consultant, and leads urban retreats and curates the Modo Yoga Journal, consults for impact-based business leaders and teams, and she's a mom of 2 amazingly beautiful girls. And not to mention, probably one of the most amazing musicians I know. Her album that she did with her sister, she had a bunch of albums, but one in particular was one of the most important soundtracks through a big part of my life, which was a divorce. So thank you, Jess, and welcome.
I didn't even know that last part, so I've already learned something new.
Oh my God, I've told you that before. I forgot which one it is that you did with Dina. It's like a mix of mantra and it's really beautiful. It was probably my daily soundtrack for months. And still I get it in my head and, we'll sing your songs to myself to soothe and stim. So,
I love that.
Yeah, thank you. And today we're going to be talking about listening as leadership, balancing co-creation and vision. I really think that there's a lot to talk about here, in terms of how you've been able to merge your business vision and a regenerative lifestyle that you've been so good at nurturing, as well as the community that you've built with Modo. It's like, I feel like what you've been able to achieve is actually creating like a professional culture into a real culture where it's not just like, I go to work and I have my work culture and then I go home and I have this, and, you do all the like cheesy team builds that certain companies do and trying to create culture, but you've actually done it. And I would just love to hear about that process, because I think a lot of people are really interested in community and how to merge what their livelihood is with what they're deeply passionate about. Jump on it.
Yeah, first, thanks for having me. I feel that everything you said about me is just completely mirrored in the way that I feel about you as a leader and a human. So thank you for having me, and I am just behind and support anything that you do, including this incredible Anima Viva beginning project that is already just expanding in all different directions. So thank you for having me. And yeah, I mean, I think that is a great way to look at it from just your perspective from afar, whereas I'm kind of in the forest. You're seeing the forest from the trees. And I do think that there is a possibility, and we're starting to see that possibility come to life now, where you can say, okay, this is the way that I want to live with my family, with my friends. And I mean, you don't say to your friends like, hey, do you want to get together on Sunday? We're going to go here at this time, and it's going to be this long, and we're going to eat this, and everyone has to order this. That's not fun, right? But no one thinks that of taking that and bringing it to, I mean, a lot of people are thinking about it now, but 20 years ago, there was a culture of real top down, the say dominant leadership model versus the partnership leadership model, where there's always from the beginning a chance for what business circles call open innovation. And I mean, open innovation is not just something that hippies and not-for-profits use. It is now being implemented by organizations like NASA that are realizing that when you open up the pool and say, what does everyone, and in the case of open innovation, what does the whole world think about how to innovate, say, space travel or innovative technology, and NASA is probably the most famous open innovator, but Harvard is using open innovation structurally a lot as well, and other institutions are starting to understand that collective leadership is not only an option but a viable and a successful way to work.
Well, I always love the metaphor of the forest. Obviously, it's for me what I turn to whenever I'm trying to make sense of the world. And some of the things I think about, a lot of people talk about, circular or horizontal structures. And the forest has some of that, but the forest is very dynamic, right? You're sort of looking at it from the trees or like being right in it. And the forest has so many different layers, and every single organism is absolutely critical to the whole. And so I feel like when you're talking about the open innovation, it's actually inviting in the moss and the ferns and the little lichens and the cicada, they're here in the background, you can hear them, to contribute to what is your vision of this overall space, or what is your destiny, and how are you fulfilling your destiny, and how does that interact with these other creatures or organisms that are present here, and I can see how using the forest model, where I get hung up through like my social lens, is that there are predators and parasites in the forest, and that they're actually really important for keeping the sacred balance. And when social models, it feels really icky, but I think this is also where we learn a lot about humans and how we can interact with each other. And one of the things that you shared, in the writing of what you want to talk about today, was about, listening as such a critical component of leadership, right? So it goes into that permaculture principle of active observation, paying attention and kind of taking yourself out, not waiting just to like speak, but actually listening. And so what has that looked like for you in the challenges and your successes of creating, this culture that you have with Modo?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I will answer it, but first, what you were speaking about, just the analogy of the forest, I completely agree with that. I think it's really apt, and specifically because I love the forest too. When you talk about moss and this idea that then you start to bring the moss into the picture. I mean, the moss is on the forest floor, right? And the perspective that moss gets is unique. And if you're a pine tree, you don't get the perspective of the moss. And you also you don't have the wisdom of how to get the dew in the morning like the moss does. And and when you're in a group and you're innovating, if you are only the pine tree or you're only talking to the pine trees, you're only going to learn what the pine trees see, what the pine trees feel, and you're only going to gather that knowledge. And when you start to open up to the whole forest, you start to get the perspective of, and we're talking about height, and that gives the false assumption that we're talking about hierarchy, but it's really not hierarchy at all, because moss got here first and it's going to outlive us all. So even though it's on the bottom, but I think that is something that's really important to think about, is when I'm about to do something, have I incorporated, have I listened, to as many voices as possible. And in terms of successes and failures, my favorite example that I always think of when people ask me about failures is starting with a consensus model, 100% consensus. And I know you're nodding because you've been there, because I know that you have been involved with communities. And we didn't actually touch upon our history, which probably no one knows, which is that we lived as neighbors in an intentional, in a community. I would say it didn't have like I guess our thread was environmental awareness and activism in Costa Rica for 6 years we lived there together. And had various, so I have examples from that experience as well as from the Modo, and we used to be, our first name was Moksha community. But in the Moksha community, our first teacher training was led all by consensus. So one example that I can think of is that, someone wanted to miss a class because she had a wedding, and we were very serious. We had the most rigorous schedule. I felt so, I felt like it was just, I had huge imposter syndrome in that training, because who am I, when my teacher's Baba Hari Das and a silent monk, and who am I to be teaching teachers? So I had, we had to cover everything, and it started at 5:30 a.m. and we ended at 10 p.m. and it was nonstop. It was totally over the top. That was also another learning, and cheers to anyone that was at that training. We definitely created community at that training. But one person they had a wedding, and they asked, can I go to this wedding? And it wasn't up to the teachers. It wasn't up to us, because we were taking a consensus with everyone involved. So we asked the group, and we spent an hour and over an hour talking about whether this person should be allowed to go to the wedding. And I got home and I was like, no.
The community I live in right now, we've been in existence for 17 years, and for the first 14 years, 13 maybe, the community was consensus based. It was a modified consensus -1. So 32 heads.
I feel it in my spine. Like, it makes me.
32 heads had to be like that.
Consensus.
And we ended up modifying that recently, and so now we are a democracy. We're at a 70-30 democratic vote, and with the exception of new membership. New membership needs to be a consensus still amongst everybody. But now we're at 30-70, and even in our voting process, because not everyone participates anymore, because I think they've all had their heads exploded from consensus. And just the tediousness of talking about, can you take a day off or not? And the simplest things can take hours.
That really shouldn't take the time. And what happens is, with the successes, so that's the failures.
Mm-hmm.
With the success comes all the stuff we've already talked about, the actual access to innovation that open innovation avails. And that the partnership model avails. It just creates the availability of more options, more listening, more learning, that a top-down dominant model does not avail.
So what does decision-making look like for you guys? I know there's a lot of different models of decision-making, but which one have you adopted?
So in the Modo community, I will say, I have a very minor role at Modo right now, because we have a CEO. We took on another partner, and I'm working, part of my evaluation of my own success was that if I'm truly leading a partnership model, it won't have to need me, because, um, like the pine tree, I'm not going to be around forever. And although I think I have a lot of life left in me, I think that starting, 20 years felt like a good amount of time to dedicate to that leadership. And so just to preface it, that I'm not at the helm of this anymore, but the way that we built our model of decision making was through surveys. Just straight up, we do. Everyone has to go to our annual general meeting. It is actually, I think it's not anymore, just because geographically it's got to be like a little bit unfair for studios when they were coming from Paris or Australia. But initially it was in our franchise documents. That, and my lawyer thought I was completely banana cakes. Like, don't put this in your documents. I was like, well, it has to be in there, that because that was our time to see each other around the campfire, to sing a song together, to connect in a true sense, face to face in real time, which does not happen anymore. That's a whole other subject in terms of mental health markers and how that's affecting us. But when before the AGM, say 3 months before the AGM, myself and whoever the COO at the time was, our chief operating officer, would do a 30 to 45, I always went longer, one-on-one call with every studio owner. So at some times that was upwards of 150 people, because there's more than one owner. So it was a big time commitment, but one that I always felt, and I would still argue today, is really, really important. And because with a big community, you can go a year without talking to someone in real time. I mean, for sure, text, oh, I saw that fun thing, but I mean, in a real time, I'm here, you're here. And then from those conversations, we take notes on those conversations, and then we would create a pre-AGM survey. And the survey would be, again, mistake in the mistake years, 15 pages long. In the more succinct years and more, learning from those mistakes, would be, like more like 5 pages long. And then everything that we would be anything a big decision that we'd be talking about would be transparently, openly presented in the pre-AGM survey. And then we would do the AGM. So we would have that time together, 3 days.
What AGM stands for?
Oh, annual general meeting. And then after the AGM, we would do our post-AGM vote. And that is where our 70-30 came into account.
So you are also doing a 70-30 democratic process.
Yeah, and these were big decisions. Like, my baby in the Modo community is our pillars. That was something that I took all of my kind of life's work, intentions, values, ethics, all my Buddhist practice, medical anthropology, which is my undergrad, and just kind of really incorporated it into who we are, what I wanted to be, what our North Stars were. And I had the feedback at some of the teacher trainings, like, oh, what are the pillars again? And so it became apparent that they had to change. And it was not fun or comfortable to say, okay, what do you think about the pillars?
Right. In permaculture, that's one of our principles, actually, which is accepting feedback, and then creatively responding to change. And there's change we can affect and the change we can't. And I think one of the more, oh God, I mean, everything's so important. But like, I remember one of the big things in discussing this with you at the time is, the cultural shift globally, this awareness and broadcasting of everything from brutal injustices to the micro ones that happen every day. And being in yoga in the Western Hemisphere in particular, I remember that there was a lot coming up in your community at that time around themes of cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation. We deal with this in herbalism a lot as well for all the obvious reasons. And I'm wondering, like, what was that listening, active leadership, open discussion like for you in that time, which I'm sure was probably very tense and really hard, and I'm sure a lot came up in your inner world, and then you have to also deal with it in this community
Yeah.
that you for leadership. How was that time for you? And
Yeah. I
what
mean,
any
that,
stories around that?
that wasn't a new thing in our community. I know the time that you're talking about, kind of when George Floyd
Yeah,
uh,
exactly.
rightfully ignited a huge swell of human rights activism. Human rights is my background. That's where I lived before I became a yoga teacher. Um, my my rooting is in Amnesty International. That's where I spent many years and was on the executive board for 4 years and did the refugee network. And I still am a member and try to write at least one letter a week ish. Um, so I really believe in that. And actually, Amnesty is a total open innovation model completely. And I'm just realizing that right now. And
Mm-hmm.
just that, hey, we can do this, we can make this change, let's all write letters, and it works. I mean, that's the thing. But what I actually think about, I wasn't at the helm of Modo. We had a different CEO, and as you know, I was going through a lot of personal trauma at that time, so I wasn't as involved in the day to day. But one thing it made me think about was the first time I was personally attacked on social media, which was actually on Facebook. It was pre Instagram.
I remember.
And yeah, yeah. And it was the first Trump election. And I said on our group teacher board, shit just got real. And a wonderful Black teacher in our community just ripped me a new asshole. you know, how dare you say shit's getting real now? As Black people, shit has been real for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And um and everyone knew that I wasn't saying that shit is not real or hasn't been real.
Mm-hmm.
But when I sat with that and I sat with her words, what came to me from we also have our live to learn pillar is all about creating a culture of feedback. So if I'm going to be a leader in a culture of feedback, then I have to listen with my ears, my heart and mind completely open. And I just became aware that, like, wow, I really was not cognizant and aware of the Black community in what I just said. And I completely claimed it and, you know, apologized in detail. And we had a really nice interaction. And I think that, I mean, gosh, there's been so much incredible. I mean, now that's all being pulled back, but so much can come from rage. I think anger and rage is just such a powerful voice sometimes. I know that it can cause a lot of destruction, but if you're open to listening to what's behind that, like, oh my God, yeah, of course, this is, there's so much behind what's being said here, almost all the time, which kind of brings us to the, this is a topic, she leads, is your title of this series, which I think is a great title because, I mean, in the Modo community, we're 95% women leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And as women, we tend to fall into more of a partnership model. And I think the call to that is absolutely a blazing call now more than ever to step up if you have any sort of calling to become an entrepreneur, if there's something you're passionate about, to either you don't need to be a woman, of course, but to learn from this sort of idea of a partnership model. And and as a leader, I mean, one of my biggest learning experiences was my very first COO that was with us for 8 years. I talked to him the other day. We're still in touch, good friends. But he said to me one time, Jess, you're ruining everything. And I was like, I remember exactly where I was standing. I was in LA, my sister's kitchen, and I was like, okay, tell me more. And he was like, well, you're nitpicking. You're getting into a project when someone will be all the way into a project, and then you'll have feedback that will take us back, and you're not setting clear expectations, and you're not listening to our needs, and I thought I was like a really good leader. And it wasn't that I wasn't, but in certain particular ways, especially being a perfectionist, I still had a lot to learn. And so I hung up, I said, Dave, thank you so much. And then I hung up the phone, I lay on the floor and I started crying. And then just like, I'm a failure. And then I went to the Barnes and Noble closest to my sister's house. And I was like, your leadership section, please. And I got the book, Good Boss, Bad Boss. And I learned my central lesson from that book, which is that listening involves letting people fail.
Mm-hmm. And yourself, I guess, too, right? Within that. Yeah, I mean, letting people fail, it's interesting. Like, so my experiences from leadership has been about identifying people's limitations early on, because then we can set the edge of what is their carrying capacity, right? And we can use that terminology in the forest, in the garden, and whatever it is, but the carrying capacity of that person, from identifying their limitation, helps you to understand, like, where can we actually help people to grow and not push them actually into panic zone where they're going to fail, and then failure becomes resentment and all heart feelings, and the things that can come up from that, and creating like too big of expectations for folks. And I think that allowing people to fail is acknowledging, okay, like where would it be okay for them to fail, where they're like, oh, that's a learning experience, versus I'm devastated on the floor crying now because I suck.
Which I'd have to feel for 5 to 10 to 20 minutes.
Of course, someone tells you.
We move through it,
You're holding
it back. To bypass anything, but
yeah. There's a few more questions. I mean, there's a lot to ask. We only have a few more minutes because we're keeping these short. But let's see.
I mean, I just, while you're listening, I will just add that, because we have so many wonderful trans leaders and teachers in our community, that I know that trans people are literally under attack right now. So I know that you mean she in the expression of all expressions of she, and I just wanted to send some love and support to our trans community out there, whether part of Modo or part of Anima Viva community, or just popping on to listen because you wanted YouTube.
Well, and that's, I think, what's also so important that women in leadership, all women in leadership, bring in is we tend towards inclusivity. And a lot of that comes from our evolution. I read a really great book this last few months called Eve. About 200 million years of evolution were pretty much like forced by female evolution. And there's a whole chapter just about how women care for each other, and evolving as a defense mechanism against the elements and predators within the species and without the species. But I think that that's something really important to just remember, is that it is genetically within the human species to want to care for each other, and specifically for female identifying. And, that culture of like nurturing is really important, to hold always in the decisions we make. And that's the part of the whole idea of like deconstructing, patriarchal systems. It's not about just bringing dudes down at all. It's about remaking how we, and regenerating really how we interact with each other,
Absolutely. Actually, you were the first, I think it was around the campfire at my house back in the day, and in Costa Rica, that I think it was at one of our birthday party, you or I, we did a craft party in my basement. We spoke about the book, The Chalice and the Blade. And that's where I got that terminology of the partnership model.
Uh-huh. Yeah. For those of you who are watching this, I mention that book all the time, and we could actually go down a whole other rabbit hole, because she talks about, Riane Eisler says that the reason why, this is what I really gleaned from the book, is that one of the reasons why we have power over paradigms is because of environmental collapse. And our response in leadership, that we can't consensus to run to high ground and when to do it. It's like someone needs to be like, everyone run that way right now if you want to live. So it's interesting in this time of environmental collapse how we're actually coming back to collaborative models instead, of this power over paradigm. So it's actually like a big evolutionary time for us as well, not just in the ecosystem, but also in humankind right now.
Yeah, I hope.
I hope so too. I hope so too. Yeah, that's why we do the work we're doing. Yeah. Right? It's not just for us right now in this generation, but it's for all of those to come. So,
yeah, awesome.
Well, we're running.
Thank you so much. This is so fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for the conversation, and I hope all of you listening feel inspired. You can find Jess on the gram. It's Jess Does Yoga, right? Jess Does, right? Isn't that your Instagram?
Jess Robertson Yoga, yeah.
Jess Robertson Yoga. Yeah, Jess Robertson Yoga or Modo Yoga. You probably have some studios nearby you if you want to support many other leaders in the yoga movement. It's not just Jess, it's a whole community out there with Modo, and it's global. And they have yoga teacher trainings, and Jess is just an amazing human. You want to plug your music quick before we get bumped off?
Oh, sure. Yes, so I have two music projects. One is Lila, Lila, and I think you can find it on all forums under Lila Bodies of Rivers, because we are bodies of rivers. Which is, the concept of nadis, which is what the chakras are made of. That Sanskrit word means rivers. Yeah. And the other is Forest May.
Forest May. So find her. Her music's really it's enchanting. So thank you so much, Jess. I love you.
I love you.
Okay, bye, everybody. See you again on the next few weeks.